and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening. Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall.
Here.
Mr. Gabbard.
Here.
Mr. Geraci.
Here.
Mr. Kelch.
Here.
Mr. DiNardo.
Here.
Mr. Thompson.
Here.
Mr. Braden.
Here.
Thank you. All members present. Item E, amendment of agenda. I have several requests to amend the agenda, so if you'll be patient with me. We'll start with the Housing, Health, and Public Safety Committee report. That will be H1. The Parks, Recreation, and Public Places Committee report, H2. In the introductory readings on K1, there was a duplicate line, so you now have the corrected copy. So that's K1. We are adding the ordinance K4, that is the ordinance repealing the prohibition against the keeping or harboring of honeybees and declaration that any beehive within the city of Norwood is a public nuisance, and regulating the keeping and harboring of honeybees within the city of Norwood to be considered at tonight's meeting. And then K5 is the ordinance authorizing the Director of Safety Service to enter a revised 60-month contract under the State Bid Purchase Program with Cincinnati Bell Telephone, LLC, for certain telephone and internet services, replacing the current 60-month contract passed by Ordinance 5-2019 and amended by Ordinance 38-2019 and declaring an emergency. And small matter, but just so you have the minutes from January 1st, 2020, we had added the page numbers at the bottom. And that is all I have. Mr. Thompson.
Move to amend the agenda as you have stated.
Mr. Braden.
Second.
Second. The motion is to amend the agenda. Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall.
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard.
Yes.
Mr. Geraci.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Kelch.
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo.
Yep.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
Yes, ma'am.
Item F1, minutes of the previous meeting from January 1st, 2020. Mr. Braden.
I'll make a motion that we accept the minutes as read.
Motion by Mr. Braden. May I have a second? Second by Mr. DiNardo. Any discussion? Mr. Bonson, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I just wanted to express appreciation for the revised minutes. I think that there's a lot of detail here, and I think it's a good thing for anybody that wants to review kind of our thought processes when we pass things or consider things in the future. So appreciate that.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall.
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard.
Yes.
Mr. Geraci.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Kelch.
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
Yes, ma'am.
Item G, request to address council on agenda items. I do not have anyone that would like to speak on agenda items this evening, so we will move on to item H. Yeah, that's now. Item H, reports of standing committees of council. We had H1 as the Housing, Health, and Public Safety Committee report. Mr. Geraci.
Thank you, Mr. President. To the Honorable Council of the City of Norwood, we, your committee of Housing, Health, and Public Safety, to whom was referred, began discussion in regards to repealing the prohibition of Ordinance 63-1986 and Ordinance 13-2010 and enact an ordinance regulating the keeping and harboring of honeybees. We request that, or we wish to report out that during the discussion, as a committee, we have decided that the ordinance go to full council and request a vote.
Thank you, Mr. Geraci. Do I have a motion? I'm sorry.
Yeah. I move that the committee report be received and filed.
Motion by Mr. Bonsall. Do I have a second? Mr. Gabbard, sir. Second by Mr. Gabbard. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye. Motion passes. H2. H2 is Parks, Recreations, and Public Places Committee Report. Mr. Kelch.
Yes, Mr. President. So we got to meet last night for our first meeting. It was a pretty productive meeting.
You gotta read.
Oh, this part? So to the Honorable Council of the City of Norwood, Ohio, we, your Committee of Parks, Recreation, and Public Spaces, to whom was referred, we discussed Parks and Recreation. And I'll beg leave to submit the following report. It's C Committee Report dated 1/27/2020. And if I would like to read the report. The Parks and Recreation and Public Spaces Committee heard from Ms. Lauren Bartosik, representing ASAP Norwood, regarding their organization's efforts in substance abuse prevention. The committee also heard from ASAP Norwood in regards to their continuous efforts in the basketball court project at Waterworks, as well as their effort to create a parks audit tool that will lead to a citywide park renovation plan. The second item, Parks and Recreation Finance Committee discussed the 2020 Parks and Recreation Capital Improvements Budget and Plan. And item A under that section is Upper Lower Millcrest Stairs. Our committee is requesting a letter be drafted and sent to the Safety Service Director and the Mayor to seek a quote to replace completely and report findings back to Council. Item B, discussing the bleachers at Waterworks 1 and 4. Requesting a letter to be drafted and sent to the Safety Service Director and Mayor to seek a time-sensitive quote to replace completely and report findings back to Council. Item C we discussed is Burwood Park drainage. We're requesting a letter be drafted and sent to the Safety Service Director and the Mayor to seek a quote to solve the issue and seek possible funding options and report findings back to Council. Item D, Public Works will need 2 new mowers in 2020. Their pulverizer attachment needs replaced, and their sod cutter is currently non-functional and in need of some welding repairs. Both of these pieces of equipment are paramount in the maintenance and upkeep of our city's baseball fields. Item E, Recreation Department requesting adjustable rims to accommodate youth basketball needs. The current movable rims that they have pose a risk of scratching the newly installed gym floor. Item number 3 is Parks and Recreation and Public Spaces Committee discussion on the Burwood Park and recently purchased playground equipment intended to be installed at the park. Item A under this is Mr. Clint Zimmerman's assessment of Burwood Park's layout and drainage issues determined Burwood could not handle all of the new equipment, as some of the timbers lay too close to barriers and standing water would pose a risk to the bordering timbers. Item B, the committee agreed that Mr. Zimmer would evaluate potential parks that could house some or all of the new equipment, and Mr. Kelch and Mr. DiNardo would consider the recommendations and make a final decision on placement with respect to time. Item C, the committee agreed that Burwood needs an assessment and solution of drainage issues. The committee is recommending the letter to request quote of repairs.
Thank you, Mr. Kelch. Mr. DiNardo.
Make a motion to accept.
Motion by Mr. DiNardo to accept. Do I have a second? By Mr. Thompson. Any discussion? Mr. Bonsall.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a quick question on here. On item 2, you have Parks, Recreation, and Finance Committee. Did you mean Parks, Recreation, and Public Spaces?
That is supposed to read Public Spaces Committee.
Okay, cool. Maybe, yeah, that could be amended if the 2 people that made the motion.
Yes, please.
Okay. Mr. DiNardo and Mr. Thompson amend their motion.
Sure.
Any further discussion? Mr. Braden, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wasn't able to make the meeting, but I did watch it, and pretty good discussions. But I wanted to publicly thank Mr. Thompson for including Ward 4 into that meeting, Fenwick and Hunter. The discussion was impressive, and I just wanted to thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Braden. Anyone else? Please call the roll.
Clint Zimmerman did get back to us, thankfully, as quickly as possible. He got back to us today. We left last night saying, with all the committee members, saying if he got back to us before 5 today, we would just basically accept his assessment because he was going to do a full review today. He did that. Basically figured out that two pieces of equipment, two pieces of the four pieces of equipment would fit nicely in the space he kind of designed at Burwood, and two pieces of equipment are going to go to that he's calling it Middle Millcrest area. And that allows us to still continue on with that plan to address some of the projects at Burwood, since Burwood's not getting all the parks equipment, specifically around the drainage issues that cause some of those problems. So just letting mostly the other two members, but all you guys know, that's what Clint recommended here, today. So just a follow-on if everyone was watching last night.
Thank you, Mr. Leonardo. Anyone else? Mr. Tracy?
Thank you, Mr. President. As you can tell, I'm not extremely happy with the decision, but we did leave it up to you two to make that decision. I do understand where the recommendations were at. I am kind of, I'm not sure how to put this. I did look forward to having some of the equipment, since it all couldn't go down to Burwood, up in at least Hunter Park. Ward 4, I feel, has been overlooked and overpassed for a while, and it seems like everything else goes away from Ward 4. Like Ward 4 has disappeared or is invisible. I was really hoping to get some equipment up there. Hopefully we can find a way to budget some money up there, at least to Hunter Park, sometime this year, to get something up there. I understand Mr. Zimmerman had stated that the equipment down at Fenwick is a little bit newer, which is fine, but Hunter Park is sparse and has nothing. And I understand the concerns of what's going on up there. I see the talk about crime and things, but as I mentioned last night, the broken windows theory, it states that if you bring the good population in, the bad population wants to stay out. They don't want to commit crimes in an area where people are playing, where people are congregating. I'm not happy. I mean, that's just my 2 cents. And yes, I'm a council at large, and I have to look at the entire city. However, I do live up in that ward, and me having a child myself, it'd be nice to have, just like anybody else, some play equipment to go to, other than just a swing set. But, that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Mr. Tracy. Anyone else?
If I could, Mr. President, respond to Mr. Dracy through the chair.
Yes.
So the recommendations we were given, it wasn't a decision taken lightly. Hunter Park does need a lot of stuff, but I would like to point out too that the residents of Ward 2 and Burwood area expected to get a lot more equipment than they are. They expected a lot of this equipment, whether we agree with how it's purchased and why it's purchased or not, they did expect that. So we need to take them into account as well, and they have other issues that they found we need to fix before they can have more. The decision to put it in Millcrest was more based on the established use of the park through sports, renting of the shelters, and supplementing to that area so that there's not shared play systems. Millcrest is a lot bigger than the other parks. It's one of the premier parks in Norwood, and right now I felt like, and I'm not sure how Mr. Denard felt, but to me, it was a better use of the already purchased equipment by the city than putting a couple of the items at Hunter Park and putting a Band-Aid on a bigger issue that I think we'll see kind of conquered in this parks renovation plan that I have a pleasure of working on and dealing with, and allowing for the opportunity for community support to come out and speak on things they want to see at Hunter Park. How do they want their park? Do they want this in their park? Do they want that in their park? Giving them that opportunity to come out and champion publicly a park that has been underserved and underutilized.
Mr. Bonson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this is a good discussion. I did watch the committee meeting last night and did hear about the very urgent time deadline that's coming up, and a decision had to be made, and the committee had agreed during that, at least what I watched, to let that decision be made essentially by Clinton as much as possible. So, I trust his recommendation, but I do think that Mr. Dracy's points are valid. I do think that there probably has been some neglect of Ward 4 in the past just by city leaders over the previous decades, and I think that this council has the opportunity to rectify that. So I would just encourage the Parks Committee to keep working on a plan, like an actual transformation plan for the parks, especially for Hunter Park, and then I'd encourage the mayor to ensure that as much as possible in that capital improvements plan and in the financial recovery plans presented to us to ensure there's ample dollars for parks, because as people at home can see here, there's a lot of passion to improve our parks, and there's a council member that's no longer on council that I remember this person saying that nobody goes to the parks anymore. They just they play video games now, and it was like so much. It was a self-fulfilling prophecy. They didn't care as much about the parks, and so kids aren't using them as much. But I think we have an opportunity here to change that and to try to make our parks a place where people want to go and not just drive away. So I would just say that I think passion's good. I think there's just a deadline here, and I can understand that. But let's see what we can do for Hunter Park this year, and I'd be fully supportive of trying to make sure that there's improvements there.
Yep.
Thank you,
And
Mr. Bonson. Mr. DiNardo.
this will be fast. The Parks Advisory Board, for anyone who's watching tonight that didn't make the committee, was something that I kind of felt our Parks Committee was going to take as a guide, and that guideline was going to allow us to perform a similar audit to at a much more detailed level than what was done today. And I imagine that Ward 4 has a lot of parks that would be higher on the need to do now list. So the Parks Advisory, the way that she was talking, he's on it, and he was kind of explaining a little bit to me as well. Basically, it's going to be a needs-based assessment, kind of similar to the way people talk about streets. What needs to be done first? What can wait a year? What can wait 2 years? So for Matt and James, I haven't seen it, but I think that's what they're spending 9 months trying to do. And so that's exactly what's going to allow us to not have an emotional attachment or a local bias to a particular ward, but rather we as a group are saying an objective third party is letting us know the order of operations of these things. I think that's going to be a good thing.
Perfect.
Anyone else? So a motion and a second to receive and file the Parks, Rec, and Public Places Committee notes. Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall.
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard.
Yes.
Mr. Geraci.
Yes.
Mr. Kelch.
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye, motion passes. Item I, third readings of ordinances, resolutions 1 and 2. 1 is ordinance adjusting certain salary ranges and amending ordinances number 73-1999, 7-2007, and 33-2009, and declaring an emergency. A, ordinance adjusting certain salary ranges and amending ordinances number 73-1999, 7-2007, and 33-2009, and declaring an emergency. B. Mr. Gabbard.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to make a motion that we place these two ordinances back into Finance Committee in lieu of the Financial Recovery Commission meeting last week.
Motion by Mr. Gabbard. Mr. Thompson.
Second.
Second by Mr. Thompson. Discussion. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Yeah, I do. Yeah. I think it'd be important if we talked a little bit more about what Wednesday's meeting was like. I should just say what I observed at the Financial Recovery Commission. One of the things that kind of stuck out, and the reason that Mr. Gabbard's probably putting it to Finance Committee, is they took a very hard line, they being Mrs. Hanrahan, Mr. and Mrs. Hanrahan. And I heard it pretty clearly that they're saying if we had gone through with putting this forward, then there's going to be some pretty drastic penalties or consequences. And so that's just something to consider, and those consequences some of them she was saying would be removal of state funding. So I think I just want to continue talking about that and what those consequences were. And more importantly, what can we do about that instead of just kind of sitting still and doing nothing? How can we work within this process to still be able to take action over the next couple months? So,
Mr. Tracy.
One thing I mentioned the last council meeting regarding these was, adjusting that time frame from January to April. I don't think most understood what I was talking about, but if we would have at the time adjusted that time frame to an April 1st, then these ordinances wouldn't have come into effect until April 1st, which would have been beyond this current FRP, which wouldn't have put us out of compliance as long as the FRP matched these ordinances. However, now we're past that point of changing it, and we have to throw it into committee.
Mr. Bonsall.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't think that what the previous council member said is completely accurate. I think the FRP is a 5-year plan, so the approach that they were at least saying is that we would have been out of compliance of that. Even though we have to update it once a year, we still would have passed something that would have then put us out of compliance of that. Now, I will just say this too. Yes, there are consequences for violating the financial recovery plan. If depending on, some of the other stuff that came out from the financial recovery meeting, not relevant to this, so I won't go about what they said, but essentially there could be other things that might happen where we might end up violating this thing anyways if we don't all come to an agreement on what a financial recovery plan could even look like by the end of March and one that fits their specifications. So, yes, there are some penalties there, but it could be in the future that those penalties might be worth taking if it means trying to, salvage some of the financial future that we've gained in the last couple of years.
that's right.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Mr. Norwood.
And I think that's very well said. I just kind of want to cement that as that's the way that we need to be going about this. We have to weigh, similar to that kind of timeline we were weighing up 2 weeks ago. What's that risk reward? At the time, we didn't know completely what that risk was. We heard it pretty clearly, or at least their perspective of it. Now we take that back and we could say to ourselves, over the next 2 months, while you guys make a plan and while we think about how we're going to discuss and approve a plan or make amendments to it, what is that cost? And maybe the finance committee, I think it was smart to put that's kind of on me or us in the finance committee to put numbers to that risk and let you guys know, the seven of us effectively know what the cost is. And we'll do our best. And then we'll lay out what that cost could look like, and we see if the benefits do or do not outweigh those costs. So I think this was difficult to hear. It was a lot more kind of restrictive than even I expected it to be. But that's not the end of things, and I think it just becomes a little bit of a bigger math problem. The pluses and the minuses still have to end up with a plus, and we'll see what that looks like now. So yeah, it's just worth it. I think that's exactly the right way to look at it.
Thanks.
Any further discussion? Mr. Brady.
Thank you, Mr. President. My question, a question to Mr. Gabbard through the chair, please.
Yes.
So we want your motion is to put this into finance. So we've discussed this and the finances of this. I was going to make a motion to defer consideration. Is there a reason why we shouldn't do that versus the finance committee, or do you have any discussion on that at all? If it's okay for me to ask.
Mr. Gabbard, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a point of clarification on what you mean defer to what?
Just motion 9 is to defer to consideration. If you want me to, I'm sorry, I wasn't addressed. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Brady.
In the rules, it's just we've already had it. We had this through committee, right? Through finance. So I was going to make a motion to defer consideration, which basically shelves it for 100 days unless action is took. The This council may defer a substantive motion for later consideration at an unspecified time. A substantive motion, the consideration of which has been deferred, expires 100 days. Therefore, unless a motion to revive consideration is adopted, if consideration is a motion has been deferred, a new motion with the same effect cannot be introduced while the deferred motion remains pending or has not expired. A member who wishes to revisit the matter during that time must take action to revive consideration of the original motion or else move to suspend the rules. So, I mean, it's fine to put it in. It was basically just a fundamental question if it's something that you knew that I may not have.
Mr. Gabbard.
No, believe me, I got no more information. I got no hidden agenda here at all. The only reason I was putting it back into Finance Committee was because the Finance Committee is going to have to work on the budget as it gets presented by the mayor, and they're going to have to work on developing this new plan. So in that, they would have this to go ahead and once that plan is revised, see how they want to revise these particular ordinances, and then bring them back out. Either way, I mean, it's 6 one way, half dozen another.
Okay.
Is the only thing.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? The motion on the floor is to move item I, 1, and 2 to the Finance Committee. We have a motion and a second. No further discussion. Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members voting aye, motion passes. On to item J1, second readings of ordinances and resolutions. J1, ordinance authorizing the mayor or safety service director to enroll the city of Norwood in the Hamilton County Purchasing Master Bid Service Program. Mr. Gabbard.
I'd like to, we just had the one reading on this so far, right?
Correct.
I'd like to go ahead and just have the second and third reading on this. I'll make a motion to make the second and third reading, I'm sorry.
So Mr. Gabbard's motion is make this a second and third reading, and Mr. Bonsall will second that.
Yep.
Any discussion? Mr. Gabbard.
Yeah, just to reiterate from the last meeting, this is a particular thing. It costs us as a city $500 as a subscription to get involved in this. It allows us to be able to be on the auction website, to be able to dispose of a lot of unwanted equipment or property that the city has. It allows us to have bulk purchasing opportunities with other communities. I believe there's like 11 other communities in total currently, and just the savings alone in our salt purchase, I mean, just that alone would save us, I believe, about $30,000. So just if anybody's got any questions, feel free to give us a call, myself or even the mayor. But I just think that this is a great opportunity for us to be able to save a lot of money and then also make a few bucks through the auction process. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Mr. Bonsall.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I had at least one person reach out to me to ask me if we have to approve ordinances for every $500 expenditure, and I told them we did not. I was just curious, is there specific paperwork that has to get signed that we had to approve an ordinance for to have this?
Yeah, a question through.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'll leave it up to you to decide who should answer that, but maybe people ought to.
It really goes through the law department. Mr. Moore?
Thank you, Mr. President. No, we don't technically need an ordinance for this, but the law department our preference has always been run as much as we can through council. If there's time, and this is one of those that the other side of this is like, this is the thing that everybody in the city I think should know, that there's this opportunity out here. The city's taking advantage of it. We're going to save some money, and because we will, before we can auction things off, anything worth more than $1,000, council has to pass a resolution, as we've done. We currently have a contract with an online auction place that the police does impound cars through and property like that. But as those resolutions come through, this will give council a heads up as to what those are about when that time comes. So, and it's a longer-term contract, so we always prefer, let's send it to council and get everybody's okay on it. But technically, no, this would be the kind of contract that the service director could or the safety director could enter without any council approval.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Anyone else? Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bunsell.
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard.
Yes.
Mr. Geraci.
Yes.
Mr. Kelch.
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye. Please read the second and third. Have the second and third reading, please.
Ordinance authorizing the mayor or safety service director to enroll the city of Norwood in the Hamilton County Purchasing Master Bid Service Program. Ordinance authorizing the mayor or safety service director to enroll the city of Norwood in the Hamilton County Purchasing Master Bid Service Program.
Mr. Gabbard?
Make a motion, we pass the ordinance.
Motion by Mr. Gabbard, second by Mr. Braden. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bunsell.
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard.
Yes.
Mr. Geraci.
Yes.
Mr. Kelch.
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye, the motion passes. Item K, introductory readings of ordinance and resolutions. Item 1, ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2020 and declaring an emergency.
I can speak on that before we.
Mr. DiNardo.
So I spoke with Jim Stith, the auditor, before I went out, and you all should have a copy here, but there are, it's really focusing on this Exhibit A in your packet. So there would be, the way that we have to worry about or think about these appropriations is when they're said, if there is either, if you're crossing a threshold either higher or lower, we have to have a vote and pass an ordinance to allow for that. Some of this is financial landscaping, and in that I mean taking a pot of money from one fund and moving it to another fund, that same dollar to another fund. Doesn't really change the total amount of the pie, it's just, where we're in this case, appropriating that money. So I'll go through them real quick and try to put a bit of color to any of these items, and then if you need any further clarification, I'll either have the information or I'll get back to you. And we can just kind of have a normal reading on it. So the first is in the Capital Projects Fund 1. This is particularly related to a need to pay out or pay an invoice. And you might say, $120,000 for an invoice, what's it for? This is for a Highland Avenue project. It's one of the state projects that was put in place. And actually, we as a city were already paid $120,000 in 2019. But we have to pay out, the way the timing worked, we had to pay out that invoice in 2020, so we had to appropriate 2020 funds to make that happen. So it's not like this is a detrimental $120,000. We've already received that money. We're literally just paying back the vendors that were associated with that particular project. Decreases in permanent appropriations to the following funds. You can kind of see the list. The one at note, someone kind of pointed it out to me right before we sat down, like, what the heck? $954,000 related to a decrease in the sewage fund appropriations. That $954,000 was, again, that financial landscaping, and it reflects the 7% revenue that needs to be sent to the water fund. So we're taking it from the sewer fund and putting it in the water fund. I don't remember what the number is for water fund, but I can look it up if any of you guys need to see that for your notes. And then the other two big movers were decreases in the Rookwood school payment, that's its own fund, and the Danamount school fund. Both were a result of lower tip proceeds than expected. We being the prior administration set appropriations in 2019 with expectations of receipts or revenue that didn't come through. So lower tip proceeds, lower revenue. We're not going to have as much appropriations for the 2020 funding. So those were kind of the big changes that you'll see on there. I guess I want to open up and make sure you guys can ask questions if you don't feel comfortable with that financial landscaping, as it were.
Any questions or discussion?
Okay. Motion to have the reading.
Motion by Mr. DiNardo. Do I have a second?
Can you repeat the motion?
To have this reading.
Do you want to have all three readings?
I mean, I'd prefer if we just pass this because So yeah, that's we can just go through. Let's
Yeah.
see if everyone votes on it. Can I have all three meetings?
Well, we have it as declaring an emergency so that we have all three
Yeah.
readings.
Well, the emergency declaration and all three readings are really disconnected from each other. But I mean, it is I would like to second that motion. So
Having all three meetings and
do it.
having all three meetings?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
good.
Okay, so to be clear, motion seconded, all three readings.
Yes, please.
Okay, any further discussion? Mr. Bonsall?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, it's just been, it's a good move to do all three readings and to get these things done as soon as possible. And it also has an emergency clause on it because we want to get we want to make sure that people, so if we're lowering appropriations, we want to make sure that money in these funds aren't spent. So it's a good move to go ahead and get it done. That way we can make sure that everything gets reflected how it should be. So I'll be supporting that.
Thanks.
Anyone else? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye, the motion passes. Please have all three readings.
Ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2020, and declaring an emergency. Ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2020 and declaring an emergency. Ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2020 and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Bonsall?
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the ordinance be passed.
Motion by Mr. Bonsall, second by Mr. Thompson. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye, the motion passes. Item K2, an ordinance authorizing a contract with Hamilton County, Ohio to provide its services and disposing of city surplus personal property. Mr. Thompson?
Move we have the first reading of this ordinance.
Motion by Mr. Thompson to have the first reading. Do I have a second? Second by Mr. Braden. Any discussion? Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Sorry, bear with me. Mr. Bonsall?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye, the motion passes. Item K3, resolution adopting the city administration's
Okay.
social...
Point of order.
Get that
Need to
one.
read the one reading.
Forgive me, I'm sorry.
No problem. An ordinance authorizing a contract with Hamilton County, Ohio to provide its services in disposing of city surplus personal property.
Okay. Thank you. Item K3, resolution adopting the city administration's social media policy. Do I have a motion? Mr. Thompson?
I would move we have one reading, or the first reading of this resolution.
Motion by Mr. Thompson, or second, Mr. Gabbard? Second by Mr. Gabbard. Any discussion? Mr. Thompson?
Question for the mayor through,
Yes, sir.
if he'd like to describe what's in this social media policy.
So this puts in place the policies for basically having a site, having a Facebook site for the city where we can have a clearinghouse for information for the community. It is a city-ran site, so we looked at other cities and what policies they did to sort of control and put in place the constraints for it so that it doesn't become the Wild West. Really, it is a communication tool. For most other communities, it's not a forum. It is more of a communication tool for anything, whether that's Facebook, Twitter, or any of those, but to share information. So all of these different citizen-led initiatives where they have meetings and different things going on, and it's a central clearinghouse. We still plan on having the city website for all the different administrative offices in the city and to try to make sure all that information goes out. But this is more for the people who are social network savvy, and this sort of lays the ground rules of what we will do and what we won't do within that site. We really feel like it's important to pass the social media policy first So the ground rules are laid out there. Before we even launch the site, we want to have the ground rules sort of laid out there and figured out.
Mr. Thompson?
Since this is a resolution, and I think it's a good idea to have these ground rules, I'd like to change my motion to have all 3 readings.
Okay.
I
Mr.
change.
Gabbard?
Yeah. I second that.
Okay. Any further discussion? So the motion is to have all 3 readings of the resolution adopt the city administrator's social media policy. Please call the roll.
Mr. Bunsell.
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard.
Yes.
Mr. Geraci.
Yes.
Mr. Kelch.
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye. All 3 readings, please.
Resolution adopting the city administration's social media policy. Resolution adopting the city administration's social media policy. Resolution adopting the city administration's social media policy.
Do I have a motion? Mr. Thompson?
I would
Motion by Mr.
move
Thompson.
we pass the resolution.
Do I have a second? Second by Mr. Gabbard. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bunsell.
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard.
Yes.
Mr. Geraci.
Yes.
Mr. Kelch.
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
Yes, ma'am.
All members present, the motion passes. Item K4, ordinance repealing the prohibition against the keeping or harboring of honeybees and the declaration that any beehive within the city of Norwood is a public nuisance and regulating the keeping and harboring of honeybees within the city of Norwood. May I have a motion? Mr. Bonson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would move that we have the first reading of the ordinance.
Motion by Mr. Bonsall. Mr. Dracy.
I'll second that.
Second by Mr. Dracy. Any discussion? Mr. Brady.
Thank you, Mr. President. I don't have the ordinance in front of me here. Do we have that distributed?
It should have been on, it had a cover page that was like that.
Okay. My question is this. I don't have any issues at all, except for, is there any limitation, can anyone answer, is there any limitation on how many hives, say, per block? Like, can everybody on one block have a hive? And it just seems like it might get excessive. I don't know. I don't have any experience in that, but just curious.
Mr. Bonsall, you want to answer that, sir?
Well, I mean, there's no limit to how many there are on any one block. But I would say, like, the more hives that you have, like, the less honey those hives are going to produce. So there's kind of like a natural limiter because the bees are limited by what they can pollinate. And so it's like, there's not an infinite number of, like, plants able to be pollinated in Norwood. So, but I mean, I can imagine, I would think that you'd probably see 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe max of these things throughout the city. Like, I don't know if it's a really, I don't think it'll be very likely that you're going to see a whole bunch of them in any one cluster of spaces.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall.
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard.
Yes.
Mr. Geraci.
Yes.
Mr. Kelch.
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye. Motion passes.
One reading. One reading. One reading.
One reading.
Ordinance repealing the prohibition against the keeping or harboring of honeybees and the declaration that any beehive within the city of Norwood is a public nuisance and regulating the keeping and harboring of honeybees within the city of Norwood.
Item K5, ordinance authorizing the Director of Safety Service to enter into a revised 16-month contract under the state bid purchase program with Cincinnati Bell Telephone LLC for certain telephone and internet services, replacing the current 60-month contract passed by Ordinance 5-2019 and amended by Ordinance 38-2019 and declaring an emergency. Mr. Bonsall.
Thank you, Mr. President. I know that Mr. Brown regretted that this ordinance did not get there before Friday, so we had to amend the agenda to add it. They just got it, basically just got everything approved yesterday from what I'd heard. Essentially, this is just amending a contract that we approved last year. We're trying to get fiber to all of the outlying buildings that the city owns. So, like Public Works was still served by like a copper wire connection. I mean, at some point, it might have been upgraded at some point since then, but I know at the beginning of last year it was really bad. They couldn't get internet half the time down there. So, or at least there was issues with the internet and with the speed. So this is just getting a fiber, and it is a dedicated fiber line to all of these buildings. So the health department's not going to have their own server there, and I think neither is Public Works. I'm not sure about Public Works, but essentially by having our own dedicated line, we can transmit the data that we need and keep it all into our centralized servers. So this is just kind of revising that. It's going to be a good thing for the city to kind of have this infrastructure in place. It'll just allow us to have more abilities to get things done in the future.
Mr. Thompson.
No, is this a time-sensitive ask?
It is a time-sensitive ask. Oh, so sorry, I did not make my motion today. Thank you. So I would move that we have all 3 readings of this.
Motion by Mr. Bonsall for all 3 readings. Mr. Thompson?
Second.
Your second. Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
And Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye. Please have all 3 readings.
Ordinance authorizing the Director of Safety Service to enter into a revised 60-month contract under the State Bid Purchase Program with Cincinnati Bell Telephone LLC for certain telephone and internet services, replacing the current 60-month contract passed by Ordinance 5-2019 and amended by Ordinance 38-2019 and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the Director of Safety Service to enter into a revised 60-month contract under the State Bid Purchase Program with Cincinnati Bell Telephone LLC for certain telephone and internet services, replacing the current 60-month contract passed by Ordinance 5-2019 and amended by Ordinance 38-2019 and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the Director of Safety Service to enter into a revised 60-month contract under the State Bid Purchase Program with Cincinnati Bell Telephone LLC for certain telephone and internet services, replacing the current 60-month contract passed by Ordinance 5-2019 and amended by Ordinance 38-2019 and declaring an emergency.
We've had all 3 readings. Mr. Bonsall.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would move that we pass the ordinance.
Motion by Mr. Bonsall. Mr. Gabbard.
Second.
Second by Mr. Gabbard. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye. The motion passes. Moving on to item L, administrative reports. Do we have administrative report this evening, Mr. Mayor?
No, we didn't.
No, sir? Mr. Moore? No?
Thanks for asking.
Then moving on to item M, other requests to address council. I have one request this evening from Pastor Sonny James. Please state your name and address, sir. Thank you.
Pastor Sonny James, 1830 Hopkins Avenue, in the wonderful city and community of Norwood, Ohio. I first want to start off by saying in the month of January, which happens to be one of the most recognized and celebrated months, not just for the African American community, but for people that have had various struggles in their life as a people. I want to compliment all of those that have set out to acknowledge just having that availability. I'm personally excited. We didn't have any of the photos ready tonight. I was busy doing some other things, but my wife, as some of you know, has a nonprofit here in Norwood called Elevations Enrichment. It's an after school program, and we gathered young people from all different nationalities right here in our great city. And it was a beautiful thing to see how children, if given an opportunity to forget about the past and to look toward their own future, how beautiful the energy can be in one room. And so I just want to encourage the residents of Norwood that we have come a long way as a people, and that's all of us collectively. And I think the viewers watching tonight can see this is a beautiful, beautiful spirit right here. We have an administration here that I think just came in the door, and that energy is spreading and it's contagious. And I'm glad to be a part of it. And I'm watching, and I want the residents to know, and you heard it right from me, none of us are perfect. We all fall short. But it's when we can admit, and when we can look at this council tonight, and as some of us are new, and we fumble, there's another brother there to lift you up and say, oh, wait, we do this. Or, oh, it's okay, we do that. And folks, that excites me. And so with that, I want to just say, let's keep moving forward. I'm so proud of our new administration coming in. I'm so proud of each of you who have dared to come and represent your communities. I'm very proud of you all. And let's just continue to grow. And for all those families that mourn across the country, the late, great NBA icon, Kobe Bryant and his wife, Vanessa, the other family members that tragically went down in a crash, our hearts go out to them, and not to those that we just lost. Not because he's a basketball icon. He's a dad, just like many of us. He's a family member, a friend. And so we want to just continue to lift those individuals up as a city and as a people, that we say, hey, our hearts are with you, our prayers are with you, and this too shall pass, no matter how sad it is. So let's keep working together, folks. Let's keep loving. Let's keep being bold enough to dare each other to just make a difference. God bless you all. Continue, continue, continue. And I tell you guys, I just get so crazy excited when I see you all working together for a common good. Even if we have some differences, we work through it. We ask, hey, how did you think like that? Or can you explain it to me a little more? Man, if we can just get this and teach this to the children and the next generation coming, whatever things plagued us as a community, those things will all be gone, guys, because we work together as a people. God bless you all. And I have to say again, my man, this is a wonderful administration. Hey, I have no complaints. I'm just glad to be a part of Norwood at this time. Keep pushing together, folks. Keep working together. God bless you.
Thank you, Pastor James. Moving us on to item N, unfinished business. Do we have any unfinished business before council? Mr. Bonsall.
Thank you, Mr. President. So at the last meeting, I'd asked the clerk's office to draft up a letter to the administration to ask them to review the Section Avenue project to see if the work that was done as specifications. I guess the first question is, was that letter sent by chance?
It was not, but I can make sure that gets done this week.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and I think a good practice will be like if somebody in council requests to send a letter, just send a courtesy copy to all of council just so we know it's sent, and then that way we can ask. The second thing is, the good thing is that we still haven't paid them yet. So I would just ask the city administration before authorizing that payment, $186,000, that again we just review the work to ensure that it's done to specifications. And do you have anything, Mr. Mayor, that you might want to comment on?
Mr. Mayor.
I did talk to JMA Engineering, so you really don't have to send a letter. I did make a note of that.
Okay.
And I did talk to the engineer in charge of that project, and they are taking a further review of it. They have a field engineer that goes out and really checks that stuff. They did say that they're not aware of any issues with the pavement, but they'll take another look at it. So that is under consideration. So,
that's helpful.
No need to work on a letter.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Anything else? Then we'll move on to item O, new business. Is there any new business before council? Mr. Bonsall.
Thank you, Mr. President. We had, and I know that you had reached out to me about this, but we had received a letter from a citizen that kind of provided some suggestions for how we might be able to make our meetings a bit more user-friendly for residents, again, that aren't on council. And there were two specific suggestions that just kind of caught my eye, and I'd love to see if we can kind of work on this. The first one was to have like all of our citizen input, or at least a good majority of it, at the beginning of the meeting. So if there is something that's not on agenda item, we can hear from our citizens and let them, some of them have families and things, and let them kind of, let us know what they want to communicate and not be here 2 hours in order to do that. So I'd like to see if the Law and Ordinance Committee, we could refer to the Law and Ordinance Committee an amendment of the council rules to amend the order of the agenda to put either all public input first, or at least maybe the first 10 people that come first, or what have you. Depending on how we might want to structure it. So the second item I'd like to talk about is the council packets. So one of the other suggestion was potentially to provide somewhere online a draft, or at least a copy of the council packet with the ordinances and the letters before the meeting, so that people can see kind of what we are going to be voting on. And so I think, and there's other cities that do provide that. So I'd love just to ask the President, Council, and the Clerk if we could look into that and to see whatever the best policy is. I know sometimes we get afraid of putting an ordinance online that hasn't been passed yet, but maybe we could figure out, put a watermark on it, what have you, whatever needs to happen. But I think they were both good feedback, and I think that I'm sure we can find ways to respond to those.
Yeah, if you'll notice, we've started adding the agenda on the council calendar, not only for committees, but for the meeting. So we're starting slowly.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic.
But yeah.
If
Thank
I
you.
can respond to that
Yes.
too. That's something that actually we were trying to work on anyway, because I'd like to be able to see that, just so that everyone can see, what everyone's going to be talking about, and it also makes it easier for, I think, the council members to be able to find the information. The big hurdle that we're running into right now is just our website and how we get information on the website. So I'm looking into different options on that, just to make that something that's available. But that's definitely on our radar, and something that I'd really like to get done.
Great, that's appreciative.
I agree with Mrs. Boyd. We've had some limitations, so we're trying to work through that. Mr. Thompson, sir.
If I could make a suggestion, we do have the sunshine list where we send out PDF of the agenda. We could include PDFs of the ordinances and the sunshine mailing. I realize it doesn't make it available to everybody, but it's a process that we already have, so it might be an interim step.
Thank you. Mr. Bonsall?
Yeah, and one positive on doing it like that too is I know I love having things digital myself, so it's actually kind of interesting. The school board does not do any paper at all. Like, all of theirs is completely on laptops. Now, the school district provides laptops to the school board members, not advocating for that. I'm just saying that, there's other ways that, we could look at this. And I'm sure, like I said, I'm sure that you all have been here less than a month. So I'm sure you all are looking at stuff or ways to improve processes. So I'm looking forward to hearing back, though, whatever that solution might be.
Thank you.
Yep.
Anyone else? Mr. Gabbard?
Yeah, I'd like to have a letter sent to the Safety Service Director to ask if he would look at some signage at the area of Carthage and Cathedral. There is a little bar there that they tend to park like right on the corner all hours of the evening and night, and just would like to get that put up so we can start enforcing that, because it makes it difficult when you're making turns, even if you're coming off of Carthage onto Cathedral, on both sides of the street, not even the same side as that the bar is on, but all those areas right there are getting a little unsafe. So I'd just like to have him if they would take a look at, like some no parking signs from this point towards, to the corner, those kind of things.
Okay. Anything else? Mr. Kelsey, while you're here.
It was mentioned briefly in my Parks and Recreation Public Spaces Committee report, but I'd like to again go ahead and request those letters for the Upper Millcrest Stairs to be sent to the Safety Service Director and the Mayor, requesting a quote on services for that, as well as the bleachers at Waterworks 1 and 4, to also request a quote on replacing those. And also a third letter to the Safety Service Director and the Mayor requesting they look into the drainage issue and get a quote and find funding to fix that issue.
Now, the drainage issue is, you're referring to
Burwood.
Burwood.
Yeah.
The second item was the bleachers at,
Bleachers at Waterworks 1 and 4 baseball fields.
now specifically the stairs at Millcrest, you're talking about from?
Yes,
Middle
from
to
upper to lower Millcrest.
That connects them,
Yes.
okay. Anyone else? Mr. Dunro?
Yeah, it's just a follow-up. I know he was right to ask for the letter, because I did ask for that last night, but I did talk to our safety service director today about starting to think through what drainage would look like and getting a quote. So I don't want to waste time writing a letter. I'm already kind of talking to him, so it's right that you asked for it, because I did, but I think I'm already speaking with him. I don't know if you need to.
But
I guess maybe I should ask a question. Is there more to it, writing a letter, if I'm already speaking with him? Is that? I don't know if that's. I guess it's a point of policy. I'm asking, like.
Just a point. I mean, we passed in our passing the Parks Committee resolution or the report. I mean, it talked about drafting a letter to the administration, so it probably wouldn't be bad to go ahead and just send it if it was in the committee report to send it. So.
Right.
If I may respond, I was going to put one letter with all of the Parks and Rec, requests, and basically just take the information out of the park report and, send it on to Safety Service Director and the mayor.
That would be great.
Okay.
Mr. Thompson?
I think it's a good idea to leave paper trails.
Yeah.
Just to let know it's officially passed from one hand to another.
Cool. Thanks.
Good point, Mr. Thompson. Mr. Gabbard?
I'd like to place into the Housing Committee the topic of Airbnbs.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to also place into the Streets Committee to discuss traffic patterns for Wesley, Marion, and Ash in regards to like directionals, whether one ways. I know Wesley, just briefly, Wesley currently is one way going north. The other two tend to get really backed up, and it just thought it might be a good idea to let's look at that and evaluate that and see if maybe restructuring those might help with traffic around that area a little bit better.
I wrote down Wesley, Marion, Ash.
Correct. In Streets Committee. Thank you.
Anyone else? Mr. Dunro?
Yeah. Also to be added to the agenda and Streets Committee, if you could talk about kind of the foundation of streets planning in general, kind of how we would approach that. I don't know if we need to look at how this council or 2020 wants to approach our streets plan. So that'd be good. And there's not a specific street there yet. It's just kind of overall, how does that look? Secondly, I don't know the process, and maybe we can talk offline or if I can talk offline with you about how this works. But if I wanted a particular resident wanted to turn one of the streets into a cul-de-sac, I don't even know how that would work, and I don't know if that's a streets committee, bring it to streets committee, or if I'm just supposed to talk to you about kind of the process there. So again, it's kind of a question, and I didn't want to talk to anybody without bringing it out here.
Are you looking at Mr. Moore?
I am,
Okay.
yeah.
I saw you.
Sorry, I should go. I just kind of was hoping you could address what's the proper way to go about
Mr. Moore.
talking that through.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would say the place to start is with the service safety director, and I think if we're gonna talk about closing off traffic on this street, or we're gonna talk about redirecting traffic flow to the place, really you need to start with a study, some kind of traffic study, not just to know what's going to happen on that block, but what happens on the surrounding blocks. And that's kind of been the approach. I mean, I don't know, ODOT probably has standards. I know they have standards for stop signs, because we've had lots of arguments about that. But that would be, yeah, definitely it's something that the committee can look at. The committee can take a look at the ODOT standards, but definitely it's something the administration has to be involved in. There's financing that's involved, but an engineering, a street study, street traffic or traffic flow study would be, I would recommend as the first step. Because you don't know just looking at it, you may not know what are the likely effects if you do this.
Then I'd fall in.
Yes, sir.
And I guess for John, Mr. Braden, I'm not trying to sign the city up for an engineering study just yet, but I can happily do that before we talk about it on the streets committee, or I can just kind of let you discuss it before I do. I don't know what you want to. I'm willing to do that beforehand.
Mr. Brady.
Thank you, Mr. President. Sure. We can get together as a committee, and I appreciate Mr. Gabbert's request, and we can certainly study the traffic patterns, and we can look at that and see what we can do. And as a committee, we can come up with some recommendations.
Okay.
As far as the street plan, I believe that if you want to look at a comprehensive street plan, if you go to the Republican website, we have one, and we've worked on, it's an extensive street plan. However, there is a plan out there to be, as far as implementing that plan, it's going to take funds to do that. So if there is a certain area that we want to look at repaving or redoing, we need to bring that to committee and discuss that and find the funds to do it. As far as a plan goes, there have been several plans. The one that comes to mind is on the Republican website. I'm not sure if it's still there. So you may be able to go there and look, and you'll see the extensive work that the Republicans have done on a street plan for Norwood.
Yeah, I think it's more of a specific question to basically ask. What should the process look like? And I know there was a streets plan, and I've seen it on the Republican website. I'm just trying to prevent me coming and saying I want 3 streets done, and you saying you want 3 streets done, and you saying you want 3 streets done, rather than us all do that and it kind of get a little bit messy in the streets committee. If we knew if you could think about a good process for 2020, 2021 to think about how we raise that, or better yet, if the streets plan could be communicated in a way that kind of laid out that priority rating.
Mr. Thompson.
In our last council's Parks, Rec, and Streets Committee, we actually requested from the administration to have an audit done of our streets. As far as I know, that request fell on deaf ears, but I do believe that would be a good place to start sort of grading the streets that we have. We can't make a plan without knowing specifically what, from an engineering standpoint, what the quality of degradation, lack of quality, I don't know how you would say it, what shape our streets are in. I think once we have that kind of assessment done, then the streets committee would be able to, using streets plans that exist or modifying existing streets plans with the new information we have, could probably put together a decent forward-looking plan for how to potentially address streets in the future.
Mr. Brady.
Thank you, Mr. President. So just to reiterate, in 2019, Section Avenue has been repaved. Forest Avenue has been repaved. Cypress Way has been repaved. And to my knowledge, new projects in 2020 are Indian Mound has been approved, and I believe that's on the way, but you understand that during these months, there's nothing happening during these months. So, asphalt, concrete, things like that, they don't cure when it's this cold. So Indian Mound has been approved. Sheridan, I believe, to my knowledge, has been approved to be repaved. Wakefield Place, I believe. Those 3 roads are in place. Okay. So in 2020, right now, we have 3 roads that are scheduled to be repaved. And there is a talk on a 4th one if there are enough materials left over from those 3 projects, that there's Tower Park is in discussion, that maybe we would look to expand that pavement. So right there's four streets that in 2020 that are scheduled to be repaved. Right. So the plans are out there. So improvements are being made and being done, and I'm very proud of that from the previous council and the carryovers here. The work that we've done is showing. Thank you.
Thanks.
I do have a question with the streets that are planned to be paved. Are those are all right around the same area? Is there a reason we're doing that, or is that easier, or is there like some sort of priority? So it's not all just one ward. Are we going one ward at a time, or I'm just curious. I want to know.
Mr. Bonzo.
Yeah, so I will say it is cost effective to keep the pavers moving. So like think basically if you're doing Indian Mound, then they're doing, and actually I missed Parmalee. So they're going to do Parmalee, Wakefield, Sheridan, if I'm correct.
I'm sorry, Parmalee?
Parmalee, yeah.
So there's another one.
There's another, yeah. So it's all connected. It's all like in a big little triangle, a square right there. But
so that's 5 roads. Thank you.
4, I think. So, but anyways, it was more cost effective. I don't know why the city administration picked that specific area. I don't know what criteria they used. It saddened me that they didn't include Grandview on that because Grandview is pretty bad, and we've had multiple residents come and talk to us about Grandview. Not that, not that we should take that into like over account, but like we should be listening to residents, and they have come and let us know. So it was kind of frustrating on that one. But that's just what the previous administration did. They were able to get some grant funding for that. So I was actually going to ask that exact question. Is everything, to the mayor, if I could, from the, through the chair, is everything still going to move forward with that specific project?
Thank you. Yes, we're moving forward with that. Well, actually, the meeting that we had the other day was talking about putting in place all the structure that needs to be put in to do that. The goal is to have that paving starting in July. So early July would be when we'd be going on with that. So, but you guys are correct. We're moving forward with that.
That's fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, one last thing. Sorry, to address Mr. Kelsch's. So Mr. Sanker, he's been pushing for those streets for years and years, and he's been sitting on council land for a very long time. And I guess, it was said that while he was here, they couldn't do it because, I guess, nepotism or whatever, but, so it's not like this just happened, though. So this has been in the process for a long time, and so it's not like we just picked this one area.
Yeah.
So these streets are bad. These streets need repair, so.
Mr. Bones?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we, just to, not correct, but just to add to the previous thing. I mean, Mr. Thinker, I don't think was a driving force behind Indian Mound getting done. I mean, Mr. Thinker and Mr. Mumper, when he was on council, they always said, don't mess with our streets because we don't want people saying it's just for us. And when I go to talk to people in Indian Mound, though, I would tell them this last time around that you're good now because Mr. Thinker's leaving. So he doesn't, he's not going to try to stop Indian Mound from getting. I mean, he never tried to stop it, but there was just not a lot of money. And again, I don't know why those specific streets were made. I highly doubt Mr. Thinker really had a lot of input on it. I think it was just something that was picked by the previous administration.
Mr. Kelsch?
I'd just like to thank Mr. Breed and Mr. Bonzall for their explanations. I was just curious if there was a method to the madness going on with it, like planning, evaluating. If not, I think we should definitely look into that in the future within the Streets Committee going forward.
I agree.
Yes. Thank you. Anyone else? Mr. Bonson.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. So I actually have just there are 3 questions, or actually 2, because we just did the Indian Mound one, but I've got 2 questions for the mayor just to kind of get an update on, if we don't mind. So the first one's the Elm Avenue project. I know we just approved the ordinance authorizing the engineering 2 weeks ago. I just didn't know, I mean, even if it's just a small update that you had a meeting, is there any update that you have on just coming up with the output of what we approved?
No, I don't have any report on that. I did talk to the engineering firm about starting the process. I'm sure they weren't just sitting there waiting for me to talk to them, so it's on their scope of things to do.
Yep, that's fine. And you can I'll probably ask about it at mini meetings, so don't take offense to that, please. The other one would be the hotel, the Old Quality Inn Hotel. I was just curious if the administration had any kind of information or update on any hope of what that could progress happening there. We didn't hear an update for the last 6 months or so, I don't think, from the previous administration. So
there's no progress that I'm aware of since they replaced the roof. There's been some discussion with Hamilton County and with the Cincinnati Development to sit down with the city and try to look at what we can do to try to move that along. But there's no progress.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Tracy?
Question through the chair to Mr. Moore regarding the Quality Hotel. Do we still have an injunction on that property
Mr. Moore?
preventing any occupancy within it?
No, that expired a year after, technically expired a year after after the city filed it.
Okay.
So, it's not habitable at this point simply because of the state of the property. So people wouldn't be allowed in there to live, but people are allowed in there to do work, which actually they weren't allowed under that original injunction we got.
Mr. Tracy?
Another response. The only reason I asked was that I happened to notice a request to lower the property value on it based on the injunction that the property owner couldn't utilize that for hotel guests at one point. So I didn't know how long that injunction was up for. It was posted in 2016, I believe. So if you're saying a year after, then it should be up by now then.
The injunction no longer exists. Actually, it was in 2000, I think later in 2016, we dismissed our original complaint, but there's still civil rights lawsuit appeals going on.
Yes.
But I refuse to speculate on what the owners in 2016 were doing. Not the same group of owners we have now.
Thank you.
Mr. Bonsall?
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. There's two items I'd like to see worked on, and I don't know if it's best to send a letter to the administration or if it's best to refer it to the Streets Committee. So I'm going to kind of say these two items, and if anybody has suggestions, you all can let me know. If I don't really hear much, I'll just ask that a letter be sent to the Safety Service Director. The first one is Mr. Peace, or Billy Peace, he has the barber shop at Lawn and Carthage. He reached out to me about people going the wrong way on Lawn Avenue up to Carthage. Lawn is one way for one block between Silver and Carthage, and there are people that go past Silver up Lawn to Carthage, and it's just there's a visibility issue and a safety issue. So he'd asked me to see if the city could just look at that intersection of Silver and Lawn to see if there was any better signage or just any kind of other best practices that we're not doing today that maybe we could add to stop that from happening. I'm sure some of it's probably people doing it intentionally, so I mean, it's going to be hard to kind of stop that, but if there's any signage, maybe we could look at that. And then the second item is on Quatman Avenue, there's no parking between Montgomery Road and Fenwick. On the left, I guess if you're driving towards Fenwick on that left side near the Holy Spirit Center. There's at least a couple residents on that road that have reached out to me about speeding, and one of the suggestions they had for me is that the road is not a super busy road, so there's not a real justification to have no parking on the other side. And potentially that could slow traffic down because it's not just a complete clear way. You'll have to kind of negotiate with cars every now and then if there's a car parked. So I'd like to look into potentially either eliminating the no parking or making it just like rush hour only. Some changes in that to see if that could help alleviate issues. So just the no parking on Quatman Avenue. So I just want to turn it over. Is there any suggestions? Do you all think it's more of a streets committee or you think city administration?
Mr. Gabbard?
I would say the second item, I would think maybe streets that we could discuss that further and get some input from the public from there. The first one, as far as the one-way part there at coming up to Carthage, I agree that is a real safety issue, and maybe just a letter to the administration and maybe the police department as well to just maybe try to keep a little closer look on that. Just I'm surprised we've not had an accident there, and maybe we have that I just didn't know about, but it is an issue there.
Mr. Kelch?
I had a resident reach out to me. It's not my ward, but I know her, and she asked if I'd bring it to council and kind of see if we get something done with this. It's at 4406 Lafayette Avenue. The roadway right at the end of her driveway on the street is a real bad pothole, and it's getting deeper and deeper. She lives there with her elderly mother, and I just think it'd be nice if we could send somebody out to kind of look at that and see if we can patch that up for her.
Mr. Boswell.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I do appreciate the advice from my council member to my left, and I do think that I would like to refer the no parking on Quatman Avenue to the Streets Committee, and then I'd like to ask that a letter be sent to the Safety Service Director just asking that the intersection of Lawn Avenue and Silver be kind of investigated to see if any additional signage can be created or is needed for prevention of people going the wrong way up Lawn Avenue.
I just had a quick question. I'm having a hard time hearing you. Is it long? Like
Lawn,
L-O-N-G?
L-A-W-N.
Oh, L-A-W-N. Okay, thank you.
It was lawn and silver.
Lawn and Silver, yep. I mean, I don't think we're definitely not asking for spike strips or anything on the street, but any signage or anything that would be, yeah.
Mr. Braden, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. So just to clarify, there's been two motions to place in the Streets Committee, and that's the traffic on Wesley, Marion, and Ash. And that's your motion, sir. And Billy Peace has spoke to you about the wrong way on Lawn and Silver.
Yes.
On Lawn, one way on Lawn, and then coming off of Silver. So we'll make a date, and I'll be in touch with the committee members on that. If I may, I got one other thing.
I guess it was a bit of an ask, but I was trying to feel out how that would work, and I would like to see further discussion on how that audit or long-term streets plan would look. I think you did a really good job explaining to me how 2020 is going to be tackled, but myself, council, residents, if there was a way to start to bring about the 2021 and beyond plan so we can, A, try to work that in intelligently into the financial recovery plan, and B, figure out the best way to work with the administration to get that plan communicated and set out. And that's, and I know it's taking you said we had the streets plan, but it's kind of putting that into an official streets plan. And that's not something I imagine gets done at a single committee, but putting that together, that process, that framework would be really great.
Okay, well, we'll discard that discussion. Thanks, you, sir. Okay, so there's the third motion. So, if I may, I have a second. Maybe this is a question for the mayor through the chair, or maybe Mr. Moore. But let's touching back on Elm Avenue, the situation on Elm Avenue. If engineering has been done already for that area, because I don't think this is a new problem. If engineering has been done already, where would I find? Does anyone recall any engineering being done on Elm? I'm hearing that it may have been done, and if it has been, where would I find that information?
Mayor Steiner.
Well, there was engineering done. There was a lot of work, prep work done back in 2000, 2001, 2003. So even 2002 timeframe. But it's 2019 right now. So going back and trying to find those records, whether the city has them, it's hard to find records right now. We'd have to really work through and try to find those. And then I did ask the engineering firm because I think they were involved in it. It's the same firm that we were using back then. But even then, they have different records, they have different servers, they have different, a process like that they could have tossed it away. So we did ask for those things. And if we can find them here at City Hall, we'll find them and try to get them to them and work on them from there.
Thank you. In discussions, if I may, sir, that could have been done, the engineering could have been done on that issue already. So that's quite possible.
Mr. Bonsall.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I did want to, just to respond to that first, it is true that the engineering could have been done then. I still think it would probably, things can change, I guess, in that time frame. Like there could be a pipe that's collapsed since then, or it could be something else that's happened. So, I mean, I think it's still a really good thing that we're moving forward with a new engineering report. But I do agree that there could be some value having that if that could be found. So I don't disagree there. I did want to correct also Mr. Braden. He had said that we had referred the Lawn Avenue and Silver intersection. It was actually the parking on Quatman Avenue that we referred to the street committee. So we're going to get a letter sent to the administration for Lawn Avenue at Silver. But
Okay, thank you.
and then I did have one other item I wanted to refer to the street committee. Potentially, and I don't know, this is probably a longer term thing, but I mean, residents in the past, I've heard from people, I mean, just going door to door talking on Glenside and Quatman, on those other blocks that are closest to Carthage, about people using it as cut-throughs and people just speeding down those roads. And so I wonder if, and I don't know if other cities have this, I haven't actually looked into it, but I wonder if we could maybe come up with a policy on speed bumps or speed humps, or basically if residents want something like that, and let's just say that this council, we can find money for it, like maybe a policy on when are they appropriate or when they're not appropriate. I think we've all seen on Williams Avenue, they've been pretty successful, at least I've seen it because I now live over there, that they do slow traffic down on Williams Avenue significantly. And I think potentially they could have value in other places, but I'm not sure how, if a resident wants to see it, like I think we might want to come up with some kind of a policy of the city and to figure out how we might do that for the future. So I'd be happy to attend the meeting and talk more about it if you could add that to a future agenda.
Absolutely.
Mr. Dracy?
Something that we can definitely talk about in there is the street humps. And one thing that a lot of cities are doing now is going to the portable street humps. They're basically made out of rubber and asphalt as a combination, and they can be moved from street to street depending on demand. They're a little less costly than asphalt itself, and they're just as durable. They're just a little bit smaller instead of a big hump. I do know a few communities that have done that, and they do move them around from street to street depending on demand. And they do have policies on how many months they last on the street, and then they end up going back to the same street at some point.
Okay, that's helpful. So,
Any further new business? If not, we'll move on to P, communications. We have 3 communications. Item P1, email from Norwood Planning Commission regarding the request for a PUD zone change. I'll take these one at a time. We'll start with that one.
To read it first.
Go ahead.
To City Council from Joseph Gears, Chairman of the Norwood Planning Commission, dated December 8th, 2019, regarding request for PUD zone change. On December 4th, 2019, the Norwood Planning Commission held a public hearing for the purpose of a proposed zone change and placement of a PUD, planned unit district, over the following properties: 2037, 2041, 2045, and 2049 Cortland Avenue, and 2036, 2042, and 2046 Wire Avenue or Wayer Avenue. The Planning Commission listened to the applicant and surrounding property owners, along with the rationale presented by staff, and then voted to recommend to City Council that the proposed zone change and placement of a PUD, planned unit district, be denied. Per section 1117.10 of the Norwood Zoning Code, upon receipt of the recommendations of the Planning Commission, the Norwood City Council shall schedule a public hearing and final action.
Mr. Boswell.
thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. President. So traditionally, like I said, we have to wait, we have to wait 30 days before we can schedule this. So I would recommend that we receive and file the letter that we schedule a hearing at the March 10th meeting, and that we ask the law department to draft up 2 ordinances, 1 accepting the recommendation and 2 rejecting the recommendation. Oh, sorry, 3 things in that motion, but.
Okay. Do we have a second? Second by Mr. Gabbard. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye. Motion passes. Item P.
Mr. President?
Yes.
I apologize. I just want to make a note. So for the future kind of getting so at the very end of the last council, we kind of made a change where the clerk of council, upon receipt of these, now this is different because this has been sitting there forever, but in general, though, sometimes the developer will have to change zoning for whatever reason, and sometimes we'll want to move fast, as quick as we can. I don't know if we need a motion or if the clerk could just do this, but basically, as soon as the clerk receives these kind of things in the future, I would recommend that the clerk go ahead and send out that public hearing notice for the next available council meeting that it fits into. So we have to wait 30 days. And that way that just saves, anybody waiting for another 14 days or so, because our meetings are usually about 2 weeks apart. So essentially, so I guess what I'm asking for is just to consider sending these out in the future, because again, this one is weird. This has been sitting around. It's not nobody's fault, but when you get these in the future, to send them out as soon as you get it. That way, we can just make sure that we move on these as soon as possible.
I got you.
Yep.
Okay, great, thank you. Moving on to P2, letter from the Director of Public Service Safety regarding water rates.
To Ken Miracle, President and members of the Norwood City Council regarding water rates. Dear President and members of Norwood City Council, this is dated January 22nd, 2020. Ordinance 20-1992 states that the Director of Public Service shall levy and assess charges in a sufficient amount to pay the current operating expenses and costs of permanent improvements to the city waterworks or water system on an annual basis. The Director of Public Service shall notify council in written form of every increase in water charges or assessments at least 30 days prior to the implementation of same. I have enclosed a copy of a letter from the City of Cincinnati increasing the water rates by 3.75% for the City of Norwood effective January 1st, 2020. I am pleased to announce that the City of Norwood will not be assessing additional percentage increases to our customers other than the 3.75% that the City of Cincinnati has passed on to us. The 3.75% increase will go into effect 30 days from January 28, 2020. Therefore, the City of Norwood will only be charging the 3.75% increase. Sincerely, John P. Murphy, Director, Public Service Safety.
Gentlemen?
Just receive and file.
Yeah, it is what it is, I suppose. So I motion to...
Motion by Mr. Nardo,
yeah.
receive and file. Mr.
Second.
Braden, second by Mr. Braden. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye. Motion passes. Item P3, letter from the Law Director regarding appointing members to the Community Reinvestment Housing Council.
Norwood City Council, City of Norwood, dated January 23rd, 2020, regarding need to appoint members to Community Reinvestment Housing Council. Dear President Miracle and members of council, I'm writing about Norwood's Community Reinvestment Area, CRA, tax abatement program. This program provides for property tax abatements on the increases in property values from new construction or significant investments in existing property. One of the requirements under Ohio Revised Code 3735.69 and Norwood Ordinance 18-2009 is the creation of a Community Reinvestment Area Housing Council, CRAHC. 2 members of the CRAHC are to be appointed by the mayor, 2 members by council, and 1 member by the Planning Commission. Those 5 individuals are then to appoint 2 other Norwood residents as members. In order to be in compliance with state law and Norwood ordinances, I am requesting that you name 2 appointees to CRAHC. Similar requests are being sent to the mayor and the Planning Commission. If you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to contact me. Sincerely, Keith D. Moore.
Mr. Thompson.
Will we receive and file the letter?
Motion by Mr. Thompson.
Second.
Second by Mr. Braden. Any discussion? Mr. Bonsall.
Thank you, Mr. President. Do we want to discuss how we are going to fulfill the request? If we're going to potentially refer trying to find these 2 people to a committee, do we want to bring resumes of suggested people? I mean, do we know by chance, or I'll kind of leave it up to you, Mr. Chair, if you have an idea already of how you wanted to fill these.
What date, what was the date that they had to be appointed? I'm sorry. Was it as soon as possible?
Really
Yeah,
like
just-
2012.
Yeah, I was just about to say years ago.
Like 2012.
Oh, okay.
Don't ask that question.
No pressure. All right.
Yeah. So,
Yes.
yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. There was a gentleman that Ms. Stevenson at the last council had recommended. I know he was interested. It was Ben Eilerman. He has development experience, including redeveloping buildings right here in Norwood. So I'd be happy to reach out to him to see if he's still interested and provide a resume to council.
Okay.
So that-
And if anyone else has anyone that is interested, please forward that to us as well.
Okay.
We'll work on that as quickly as possible.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair.
So I suppose also it's an ask to the public if that's something you're interested in.
Right. Good point.
Just contact us. One of us will put it forward.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Mr. Tracy?
I think just kind of expanding on that, is there a way that we can get it out publicly versus just here on the council floor? Because I don't know how many people actually watch the council meetings.
City's Facebook page.
How about the city's Facebook page?
Yeah, pass that policy.
That's what I was thinking.
Mr. Botzel?
Yeah, thank you. I did want to note too that hopefully we can have, ensure that this committee, it reflects kind of Norwood in general. So it'd be really great if there's people out there that are interested, just make sure you speak up, because it would be good to have this thing look like Norwood looks. Have people of all genders and such, and we don't have that everywhere in the city right now. So it'd be great to have that as much as possible on some of our boards.
Any further discussion? We have a motion to receive and file the letter from the law department. Please call the roll.
Mr. Boxall?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members voting aye. Motion passes. Brings us to item Q. Excuse absent members. All members are present. Item R, adjournment. Mr. Braden.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn, second by Mr. Bonsall. Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members voting aye. We're adjourned.